once, Buzz. My ass.
I'm only 4. Bonjour, Monsieur Pussycat.
Cracking toast, Robert.
Start spreading the news.
Hello everyone and welcome to the short podcast about short films. I'm your host and today we are discussing the Academy Award for Best Animated Short. Today's episode, however, will be a little bit different. As we have finished the first decade of the category, I want to take some time to just look back at what we've covered so far. There will be no guest this episode, just me talking to you. We'll go over some of the major themes over the past decade, maybe share some stories that would be interesting, and at the end of the episode, I'll share what my favorite shorts of the decade were, so if you want some recs, stay tuned. Before we get into it, I do want to quickly thank all the guests who I'm so thankful took the time to talk to me about 90-year-old animated short films. So thank you to Christoph, Zeta Short, Owen Daly, Sam Meltzer, Gordon McNulty, Ronaldo Sosa, and Jacob Sanchez. Thank you to all of you, and I'm so excited for all the great guests I have next season as well, with some friendly voices returning and some new people to join our short pod family. But let's get on with the episode. So the main theme of the 1930s was Walt Disney. That's obvious from one glance at the list of the nominees in the decade. Of the 27 total nominees in the 30s, 15 of them were for Walt Disney. That is 56%. 5 out of every 9 nominees. And not only that, every single winner was Walt. There were 8 awards and all 8 went to him. And as just a cherry on top, they also gave him an honorary Oscar for creating Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which came in the form of 1 big Oscar and 7 little ones. But there's more to the story than just the Oscar success. As I've iterated over the course of the podcast, a lot of these shorts, in particular those in the Silly Symphony series, were created for the purpose of advancing the art of animation, in particular to train the Disney animators well enough so that they'd be ready to make their first feature film. And so we watched as they started using color and flowers and trees, honed the art of making fully formed characters in short runtimes with 3 Little Pigs and Tortoise and the Hare, giving personalities to characters which can't talk, like in 3 Orphan Kittens, created a new sense of depth in the film with the famous multiplane camera first used at the Old Mill. Plus there were innovations that we couldn't see just by looking at what the Academy nominated. Most importantly, in the short The Goddess of Spring, which is where the animators really learned how to animate a somewhat realistic human being. These efforts eventually led to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which wasn't the first ever animated feature film, but it was certainly the first one to reach the success that it did, and it showed the world that animation was really an art form of its own that was worth investing in. The biggest lesson for me about Disney at this time is that there is a middle ground between art and commerce. When people look at Disney of now, and think that, the corporation is so soulless nowadays, they only want to make money. Old Disney was more about the art. That is kind of a lie, or at least partially. The Disney has first and foremost been about making money, always. The difference is that they found the best way to make money is by also making something good, something creative, something fun, new, different, and by showing people something they haven't seen before that makes them curious to come back, wondering what else you have to show them. That is how a brand is built. But there's problems brewing at Disney too. Though Snow White was a massive success, Disney's next 2 features, Pinocchio and Fantasia, incurred massive losses to the company. They did well at the box office, but they were also just very expensive. This led to massive layoffs over at the animation studio, many animators being dropped without any kind of severance package. This was kind of a tipping point for a lot of the staff at Disney. They already had to deal with being overworked. There were a lot of issues involving equal pay, and many workers were sick of Walt taking all the credit for their work. Of course, Walt did not see any issues. He thought everything was perfect and that everyone should be grateful that they even had a job to begin with, and that he is being generous by having the studio. This is when the unions come in. The Screen Cartoonists Guild was a union made for animators, first forming after a strike at Fleischer Studios, and went on to make agreements with every other major animation studio, with Disney being the only one unaffiliated. At the start of 1941, the union was meeting with Disney Animators to begin planning unionization efforts. In February, Walt Disney made a speech at the company, in which he stated that many of the practices that people were calling unfair were instead of out of respect for those who work hard. And something I find funny in the speech, he says that if people are unsatisfied with their lot in life, they ought to do something about it. I assume he meant that they simply work harder at their job on the off chance that they might get noticed, but that's not what happened. The animators did do something, and that something was join the Screen Cartoonists Guild. And in May, Walt was getting fed up and feeling betrayed that his employees would dare criticize his work environment and join a union in the hope for better conditions, and so he fired 16 animators because of their involvement in the union, including Art Babbitt, who is one of the biggest animators at the studio, having personally animated the Drunken Mouse and the Country Cousin and the Evil Queen in Snow White. This was the last straw, and on May 29th, 1941, over 200 employees went on strike. The strikers received a lot of support from the other animation studios, and employees at companies that work with Disney, like those at Technicolor. Some refused to work on Disney projects until the strike was done. You also had other unions going out to theaters showing Disney films and protesting there in support of the strike. And of course, all of this pissed off Walt. In Dumbo, the clowns in the film are said to be representing some of the strikers. But something I love about the strike is the signage they made for it. As these are Disney animators, they're quite talented artistically and made some great signs. You get a lot of art of various Disney characters protesting with them. Some slogans include, "I'd rather be a dog than a scab," "Are we mice or men?" and "It ain't cricket to pass a picket." I had to look that last one up. Apparently cricket used to be a synonym for not honorable. Also, there was a day when they brought a whole functional guillotine and beheaded a fake Walt Disney. It's great. You gotta look into this if you haven't. But the strike went on for almost 4 months before eventually Walt Disney agreed to a deal with the unions due to pressure from the national government, and it led to equal pay between animators with a clear pay structure, as well as reinstating fired employees and implementing a grievance procedure when it comes to letting them go. However, these were mere band-aids to cover a gaping wound, and Disney still lost half of its animators because of the strike, getting picked up by other major studios, with only Fleischer and Terry Toons not taking anyone, which I can only assume is because Fleischer is broke and Terry Toons is cheap. Most notably, I want to mention that a few of the animators who left, including Stephen Bostow, David Hilberman, Zach Schwartz, John Hubley, Ted Parmalee, and more, would go on to create the studio United Productions of America, or UPA, which is made to give the creatives there more freedom to experiment and stretch the bounds of animation. They will be a major figure down the line in this category, but at this point they're just the glint in the eyes of some frustrated animators. But let's not pretend that this decade was just Disney. There were, in fact, other studios making animated shorts in the 30s. The most nominations behind Disney were for Fleischer Studios and Harman Ising with 3 each. Both of these studios would not be seeing much success after this decade. Fleischer had hit its final peak in 1938 with the success of their animated feature Gulliver's Travels. After this point, the relationship between the brothers Fleischer, director Dave and producer Max, had dwindled significantly. Not only that, but into the 40s, their shorts had stopped being profitable, with only the Popeye film seeing any love. In 1941, Paramount, the Fleischer distributor, acquired the rights to Superman, and had them create some shorts based on the character, which were very expensive but also very popular. But the profits from these Superman shorts were not enough to offset a lot of the losses they faced due to their other projects, and Paramount assumed control of Fleischer Studios in 1941, and the studio was shut down in 1942. As for Harman Ising, they were connected to MGM until 1937, after which they were let go in favor of creating an in-house animation studio, and from then on became independent. They lent some staff to Disney during the production of Snow White, and Disney even hired them to make some silly symphony shorts, but ended up only taking one of their shorts, with Harman Ising selling the other 2 to MGM. Eventually, Harman Ising rekindled a relationship with MGM and worked under their banner until 1941, when Harman left MGM to make his own studio, and Ising left in 1942 to join the war effort. While both had later work, neither would achieve anywhere near the success they had early in their career. There were only 3 other people nominated for Oscars this decade, each with 2 nominations apiece. Charles Mintz of Screen Gems we discussed already in the 1937 episode, and his name is one that will likely not be repeated on this podcast ever again. Then Leon Schlesinger of Warner Brothers and their Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes series, he's only just beginning, and while Schlesinger himself will never win an Oscar, he's building the groundwork for Warner Brothers and eventually he's building the groundwork for an eventual 5 wins in this category for Warner Brothers, most of the wins going to his successor, Edward Selzer. And I'll discuss that more later in the 1940s series. The final man nominated this decade was Walter Lantz, who has a studio named after himself that worked mainly under Universal. He is a constant figure in this animated short category through the 40s and 50s, but never gets a win. He is in fact the most nominated person in this category to never win, with 10 nominations over his career. Now that we've gone over the decade behind us, let's take a little peek at what's ahead. We've got some new names ahead of us, such as Fred Quimby, who became the head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's animation studio, plus the aforementioned Edward Selzer will take over Warner Brothers. In terms of some lesser-known names, we'll come to learn more about Paul Terry and the Terry Toons, as well as a brand new mortal enemy of mine, George Pal and his Puppet Toons. I hope you're as excited as I am for the next decade of the category. We'll have a lot more films to discuss, but I'll try my best to keep the episodes short and sweet. Though that seems a bit unlikely, since while most of the episodes this decade had only 3 nominations apiece, we get to see years with up to 10 nominees in the following decade, so get ready for that. But as a final note, here are some short recommendations, and I'll start with my top 5 nominees of the 1930s. So number 5, I have Popeye the Sailor Meets Sinbad the Sailor from 1936, and it's a short that's both gorgeous to look at and just a lot of fun to watch. Number 4, I have The Old Mill from 1937, probably the most impressive short this decade in terms of its animation, and there is a marvelously crafted story told with entirely through the environment and visuals. Number 3, I have The Little Match Girl, also from 1937, which is just a heartbreaking story told with all the emotional heft it requires, plus is just so lush with color. Number 2, I have Brave Little Tailor from 1938, an exciting adventure story with a great balance of comedy and action, and works extremely well despite the fact that it stars Mickey Mouse. And number 1, I have 3 Little Pigs from 1933. While it may seem a bit more simple or mundane than the other shorts on this list, it features some truly great writing and animation. And plus, a common thread over this series will be me getting suckered in by a catchy song. And one last thing, I want to share some favorite shorts of mine that weren't nominated but still deserve love. First and foremost, we have some Betty Boop shorts who went very underappreciated by the Academy, my favorite being Bimbo's Initiation, which has some both very exciting animation as well as an incredibly catchy song. On the Disney side of things, we have the Silly Symphony about the Pied Piper, or if characters are more your thing, try the Band Concert or the Mad Doctor, 2 very good Mickey shorts, which is a lot coming from me. In terms of Merry Melodies, if there is one short you should watch from these recommendations, well, you should watch Bimbo's Initiation. That's the best one here. But if there's 2 shorts you watch from these recommendations I'm giving you, watch The Blowout. It's a Porky Pig short involving a domestic terrorist. It's a laugh riot, and Porky Pig is adorable. And that's it. Thank you, listener, for tuning in. This has been the Short Podcast about short films. Until next time, goodbye.